The following podcast is a Scrum Inc. production.
Welcome back to the Agile CEO. I'm JJ Sutherland, the CEO of Scrum Inc. And this time I'm really excited to be joined by an old friend of mine, Jeff Johnson. And I'll let Jeff tell his story, but Jeff was the assistant director of the FBI and the CTO. Then he went to the U.S. Postal Service, was VP there. Now he's doing a lot of advising, consultant. He's a board director. One of the companies he's advising is Virtualytics, which is incorporating AI into how do you get the data to actually mean something and show you something. So I'm going to be definitely talking to you about some AI, Jeff. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's always a pleasure to get together. We always have a lot to talk about, and I always want to talk for more conversation. So I appreciate it, JJ.
So I'd like to go back to, because not everyone has read, the book that, the first chapter of that book is critical, your story of the FBI. So take me back to that day. I just remember you telling me the story that you joined the FBI and you're up at like the director's office and you have this great view of the Washington Monument. And all of a sudden you're told that is not going to be your fate.
Yeah, I started at the FBI in August of 2009. And the original intent that my boss and I discussed was that we are going to go work on a lot of the infrastructure and architecture of the FBI, make sure that the FBI was enabled with the latest and greatest laptops, mobile phones, networks, and servers. And there was a lot of technical debt that needed to be erased. And that was really my wheelhouse. I had built, I'll say shared resource pools. You might call it cloud today, but it was using virtual machines across the globe for a global bank, Lehman Brothers, and moving workloads from virtual to physical, managing patches, doing vulnerability management, instant response, all of those kind of meat and potatoes, hands-on keyboard type of technical work, and the FBI needed a refresh of those basics. And of course, at the time, they were still struggling with the case management program. But we had an agreement that they were going to continue down the path. They had a good project manager, a lot of great experience. They had controls in place with a spiral incremental process. So they had hard checkpoints in place. And that was going to continue. The expectation was that was going to continue on its path. Obviously, the FBI had been working on trying to solve this problem really since the mid-90s. And we're sitting here November, December timeframe of 2009. So many, many years and hundreds of millions of dollars down the road on this path. We tried to
just go back and explain, what this is. So the FBI was keeping everything in paper, right? And they hadn't been digitized fully. And explain how they use it. Explain the red pens about how they kept all their case notes.
So the FBI, just, like basic overview at the time, and really since the history of Hoover in the 1920s and 30s, it had a very mature and robust filing system to make sure that they knew what they had, but that didn't allow them to do a lot of intelligence and investigative correlation, connecting the dots. So they would write up the result of an investigative activity, is kind of a general way to describe it. And then they would take a printout of that document and they would use a red pen to underline specific entities that were important. So if there was a subject of an investigation and there are certain attributes of that subject, that might get circled or underlined. If there were witnesses, that would get a different indicator with the red pen. And then that file, those pieces of paper, those would go to the support team within the field offices, who would take the red pen marks and they would make 3x5 cards called index cards, just like you would think of as an index card. Or the way I described it, it was the FBI's Dewey Decimal System to get to their library of documents. And so instead of having, author, subject, or what you'd find in a Dewey Decimal System to find something in the library, you would have subjects, witnesses, other key attributes, so that if you're looking for something, you could go pull the piece of paper, get that document, review it for a possible connection. So I would argue a very powerful system in the age of paper. Those index cards in the mid 90s were actually moved up to the mainframe in a system called ACS. And so now you could essentially search the Dewey Decimal System of the FBI, if you will, for what content did the FBI have. Now, mind you, you're not searching the whole document. You're not searching for all of the content. You're frankly just able to highlight what the investigator, within his perspective of a specific case, thought was important to go back to get that document back, kind of thing, is the filing system. So all of the index cards were represented in ACS, which was a huge leap forward. And a fraction of the document actually got digitized and moved into the system as well. So a fraction of the documents were eventually made digital. But that whole process would end up taking weeks from the investigative activity to when even the knowledge that the activity happened with an index card or what the important entity was from that would take weeks. Obviously, after September 11th, that was no longer responsive to the threat environment that we were in. So the FBI had a virtual case file program already ongoing on September 11th. The FBI tried to accelerate that and deliver it more quickly. They determined that that was not going to be usable in 2005 era. That's when they launched the Sentinel program. As again, that the idea was to replace the entire case management system. And one of the interesting things that I changed on the program as we went from Big Bang and then Spiral Incremental and then really threw it over to an Agile program is in the requirements document, the first couple of pages basically describe what the case management system was and said, we need to completely replace the prior system and don't fail like our prior attempt was essentially the goal of the program.
Don't fail. Just, don't fail.
And one of the first things I did is I started digging into the contracts and digging into the requirements document and really trying to understand what we were trying to build. And in spring of 2010, I said, look, I've never known a team that can be really, truly successful by trying to avoid failure. We've got to come up with what are we really trying to achieve. And I took that time lag for the documents, for the organization to be aware that something happened. I took that time lag. I said, that's the only thing we care about. I've got 1,200 requirements. I've got pages and pages of contract documentation and requirements documentation that's been signed off by dozens of people. And all of it's informative. But the one thing that we're going to guide all of our decision making is what I coin time to awareness. The number one goal we have is when the FBI does great investigative work and comes out with their observations of what happened or what is happening or who was involved or any of those key pieces of information, I've got to get that to the corporate corpus of data as quickly as we possibly can, because that buys down that time risk. And if you're thinking about making a decision to either prosecute a case and get a dangerous person off the street, or make an arrest, or take a disruptive activity to mitigate a criminal network or a terrorist network, time is critical. You've got to get inside that decision loop and the loop with the criminal to get away, if you will, right? So that's the number one thing that I talked about the entire time is time to awareness. And I believe that was one of the key paradigm shifts that we made as a team that helped us be successful.
Yeah, I use that all the time with clients now. When I talk about your story, I'm like, how long does it take an organization to be aware of what's happening both externally and internally? It's real. I've completely stolen that. I do give you credit.
So yeah, I mean, And I can't take all the credit because you can go back to the Vietnam War and the description of the OODA loop. Your decision has to be inside your enemy's decision. Or in corporate world, your decision making has to be better, higher fidelity, more precise, and you should be faster than your competitors. And if you can do that consistently with a great team, trusted teams, you will consistently win. You may not be 100%, but you'll consistently win.
Absolutely. John Boyd's OODA loop and that speed of decision making is really important. So take it back. So you see this lag of a few minutes just to switch from one screen to another in the Sentinel project. And you start digging through the contracts and they've spent, I don't know, $400 million. And, your boss says, okay, go fix this. What was the pit of your stomach like when you said, oh, this has been failing for 15 years?
But there's a couple of stories. One, it wasn't simply a one-way conversation. Go fix this. It was a two-way conversation. Chad Fulgham and I had a great relationship going all the way back to serving together in the Navy when we were both taking on the Y2K project, honestly, and that had a clear time box to it, right? You weren't going to move the deadline. It was really a function of how fast could you mitigate that risk.
Right.
So I was familiar with working with Chad in high stress environments with clear, unmovable deadlines, and we were going to move fast. We were going to very much operate in we'll ask for forgiveness versus ask for permission, because we're going to take the initiative and we're going to move out. And that really goes back to the basics of leadership that they teach you at the Naval Academy from day one on initiating action and tackling hard problems and leading teams. As I started to think about what he was asking me to do, I knew it simply had to be done. You think about the threat environment that we were in, you think about just the sheer challenge that all government agencies were having in being able to get the right information to decision makers in a timely fashion so you can make those strategic and tactical decisions. It just simply had to be done. Given my background in the Navy, in manufacturing, in global banking, I felt that I could lead the team in a different path and get it done.
So how did you reach, hey, we're going to do this with Agile and Scrum? It's not like, there were a lot of books or, knowledge, sort of popular knowledge out there at the time.
Yeah. I was familiar with Agile and the Agile Manifesto. And when I read it, it felt right to me. It felt really comfortable. And it aligned very closely in my mind with what I did at Stryker Medical with lean manufacturing. And so I worked in lean manufacturing. We studied lean. We did physical experiments to compare production times based on whether you've got WIP or don't have WIP, and really streamlining and load balancing and thinking about all of those things in a physical assembly line fabrication environment. So it became very natural to me to kind of think in those terms of we've got to get the flow of producing value moving and get that velocity moving, and do that where members of the team can interact very directly with what you're doing is helping me or what you're doing is defective. And those feedback loops don't rely on management to identify them and do big corrective actions, but you're doing a micro feedback loops through all of the individuals on the team, not just the hierarchy and structure. So I read a book about lean software development. I read a couple of books about Agile that were out at the time, but I really leaned into, pun intended, my lean manufacturing background and what I understood around communications, leadership, collaboration, feedback loops, decision-making that I learned in the Navy. And a lot of that hinged on the way the Marine Corps contributed to the Naval Academy Leadership Program, honestly.
Yeah, my father, when he created Scrum, he looked back at his time at West Point and his time as a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and he said almost exactly what you said. It's this quick, fast feedback loops. And he always said, the ones who didn't get quick feedback, they didn't come home. And that was incredibly important.
Right.
So $400 million has been spent. You got like $50 million left in the budget. And the first thing you do is you cut all the contractors, bring all the development in-house, and you end up in the basement. And when you took me down to that room, there are no windows, cinder blocks. It's not. When you imagine the glory and the prestige of the FBI, it's not this building, not this room. But you had to convince a lot of people within the FBI, within the Justice Department, Congress. What was the reaction? You said, "This is what I'm going to do."
Well, there are a lot of reactions depending on who you're talking to. So I started my interaction with the team in the winter, 09-10. In March, that's when I started to own it. So I really dug in with both hands. And again, I even as an executive, as a chief technology officer of the FBI, as an SCSer at the FBI, I made sure that I went back to source material. What are we trying to achieve? Why are we trying to achieve it? What are the contracts that are in place? What are the requirements? Do I have an understanding of really what we're trying to do here? And at the same time, I started reflecting on what I knew people were capable of doing in the private sector. And I started talking with a lot of the people who had been involved with the Sentinel program. And there were a ton of great people in the Sentinel program. Unfortunately, given where it was and the notoriety that was around it, particularly given, I think we had 29 different external oversight organizations that were Monday morning quarterbacking, which in some cases that was a useful feedback loop. Very few cases it was a useful feedback loop. And I realized that we had the talent to get it done. We didn't have to go get a new team. And there was enough understanding, there was enough capability, but we did have to lean it out. We did have to get really tight about who's communicating what to whom, how many people do you have to communicate to get something done, who's moving things out versus what's the prepared input necessary for that. How do you get through a testing process and think about security at the same time? And we did some really aggressive things in that system that we were building. So the deputy director, the director, they were looking for a solution, and Agile was a part of the solution. But I also remember very vividly as I described this to the Director Mueller, and Director Mueller is a Marine. He always will be a Marine, and he's a federal prosecutor. He always will be a federal prosecutor. So if you're not prepared to be cross-examined, you probably don't want to be in the room. My father's an attorney, so I felt comfortable with that. When we described Chad and I described what we want to do, it really came down to it's probably the least bad option. And given our background, we really did believe that we could pull it off, particularly if we are given the flexibility to be ruthless in the requirements and be ruthless on what is a minimally viable product versus what maybe somebody wanted in their perfect utopia end state, where in many cases their perfect utopia end state was exactly opposite somebody else in the organization, which had to be reconciled and was best reconciled in working software, not best reconciled in meetings over abstract concepts. So that became very much a part of what we were proposing there. And I remember telling Director Mueller, I said, this is not magic. This is not a silver bullet. Changing it, calling it Agile, doing 2-week sprints, doing 0-100 completion is not going to magically make this thing go faster. We've got to streamline the feedback loops. We've got to make sure everybody's fully engaged. We've got to make sure we're going as fast as we can while having the controls of testing and security testing integrated into those feedback loops. And oh, by the way, this is going to be hard. My wife is not going to like the fact that I'm sitting here proposing that we do this. And I talked about it like this was going to be my deployment. I was going to just fully commit to making this happen in the next year and a half. So that was my pitch to Director Moeller, and he believed me that I could do it. The other conversation I'll never forget is we had what we referred to as the four corners of congressional oversight. So we had the two committees and then a staffer from both parties on both committees. And they were questioning this proposal and why they should expect any different outcome than what they had seen over the past decade and a half. And I remember one of them said, "Why should we trust you?" And being able to add me, integrity, trust, all of that is absolutely critical to who I am. And if you talk with people who have worked with me, they know that I've got a very low tolerance for that. So it hit home as a question. And I thought about the background of the program, and I thought about what had been demonstrated. And I finally came to the conclusion the only right answer was, you shouldn't trust me. Because what I have now is a plan. And plans are, Eisenhower said, plans are only good until first point of contact. Plans are worthless. The act of planning is invaluable. So we knew we had the right talent and resources. I believe we could streamline the intent and the requirements and make better sense for what we were building, not what we were trying to avoid. And I thought if we streamlined the processes, we could get that team to perform at a level necessary to achieve the goals, which is complete theory at that time, right? So my response was, you shouldn't trust me. But given how much you've invested in this to date, there is no reason why you shouldn't give me, let's call it 16 weeks, 8 sprints. What they say at the time is 5 to 8 is what it takes for these teams to come together. Give me 16 weeks and we'll see where I'm at. If you want to make another decision after I run this for 16 weeks, then let's make another decision then. But right now, based on the information that we have available to us, we believe this is the best course of action. And it's only going to cost you because by the time we get started and then get 16 weeks, it's only going to cost you about 24 weeks of risk. You've been sitting on it for a decade and a half.
That's amazing. I just love that one of the things I run into a lot of people like, well, this is really risky to do this at an organization. And it's so much, it's reducing your risk. And and I love that you say it's not magic, because I also say all the time, it's not going to solve all your problems. Right. It's hard. And the key, and I was speaking with General Gwyn Jenkins, who's a 4-star general, he's a Marine in the UK military. And he implemented Scrum in a few different places there. And he said exactly what you said. Ruthless prioritization is the absolute key. And that is actually really hard to do.
I spoke with him last June, and I swear we had a mind meld in the first 15 minutes. And I think it really comes down to that leadership and empowerment aspect of what you can do when you think about the whole thing. When you think not just about Scrum and stand-ups and demos and retrospectives, when you think about how that impacts individual decisions, you think about the fact that the developers and the architects and the solution engineers, they're all out there making 1,000 decisions a day. And the question is, how are you creating that environment for all of them to be successful together? And that's the communication environment. That's the taking care of your buddy to the left and the right type of environment, and leadership mindset and trust that when you get a really high performing team doing this right, it's really a fun team to be a part of.
So going back to lead, that's a really good point. When you're talking about leadership and leading these teams, this team of teams, I assume, and how did you motivate them? How did you keep them? Because they must have felt the pressure too, especially the ones that have been on this program for a long time, like very high stress. And at a certain level, once you turn that thing on, you couldn't fail. I mean, this is, the FBI. This is, it's really important, this work. How did you lead your team? How did you keep them with the eyes on the prize?
So there are a lot of aspects to it. Part of it was really engaging their desire to see it work, because they had poured their heart and souls into it. The Sentinel team was not short of talent. The contractors, the employees, the people that were on that program, sometimes people would use the excuse of maybe they're not the A players, maybe not all of them are the A players, but you very rarely get a team that's all top stars. And frankly, all-star teams sometimes fail too when they don't know how to work together. So bringing them in as a team, engaging them as a team, I paid for a few lunches to get some people over the hump out of my own pocket. And that was definitely a part of the thing, especially with some of the talent that had better options at the time. The rumor going around I heard was that everybody was being recommended to jump ship. The highest talent always goes first. And they were being told to take Sentinel off of their resume because it had such a bad name. Wow. And I had another advisor say, change the name because nobody wants to be associated with Sentinel. I said, I'm not doing any of that lipstick stuff. We're just going to fix it. And Sentinel will be something that the FBI can be proud of for decades. And I'm happy to say that that's still the outcome that we achieved as a team. I'm very, very proud of that. The other thing that I did as we got into it, we were probably several sprints into the thing. And I had a great Scrum Master who, this is kind of an interesting story because one of our contractors brought him in from San Diego. He was TAD. Their plan was he was going to stay for 4 weeks and to basically bridge when they could find a local Scrum Master. And in that first 4 weeks, the first couple of sprints, as he started to get a feel for the team and who they were and what we were trying to achieve and how we were trying to do it, he went back to his management at the contractor and said, I think I'm going to see this through. So wow. He had a plan not to be on it more than several weeks and out. And after he became part of that team, and it was an engaging team, one of the best I've ever worked with. But he and we would constantly talk about lean and, some of the psychology of how the team was doing. I actually had another PM on it from another part of my team as CTO who had a psychology background before he came to the FBI, and he was working in IT. And I said, hey, why don't you come over here and take a look at this and watch one of our demos, watch a retrospective, and then come back and give me feedback on what we might want to think about to make it better. He came back, he said, you're sitting on a powder keg. The amount of stress in this room is palpable. This team is going to fall apart any given time. It's just like something bad is going to happen. He said, you got to have a stress relief, but go have a picnic, pizza party, something social, kind of bring everybody together, get them out of the high stress environment. Mm-hmm. And whether this was me being young, naive, like straight outcome focused and mission focused or not, I decided instead of doing something that I considered superfluous like that, I said, let me get the perspective on why we're doing this more ingrained with the team. So I put the team on a bus in downtown DC. I bussed them down to Quantico, Virginia, where the training academy is. And I gave them a little taste, a couple hour taste of what new agent training might be like. And the taste that we selected it was a virtual simulator exercise for firearms training. So we gave them 45 minutes, an hour of congressional law and when it is legal to take a shot, when it's not legal to take a shot, all of the legal considerations in law enforcement are around that. And then this virtual scenario is arrest scenarios that have a potential to be high risk and become threatening. And it was simulated weapon, full screen, surround sound, the whole thing. You felt like you were in an arrest scenario, and you had to make the decision. And this is a decision that you can't take back. These are the decisions that our law enforcement professionals, our first responders are making life and death decisions, seeing stuff that you and I don't ever want to see. They're making those decisions every single day, sometimes several days a shift. And I put a bunch of developers through this. And then I put them on the bus and I said, now, if you were in that situation, and it wasn't just a laser and it wasn't just a training situation, but this was a no kidding, can't take it back decision. Do you want information that is this many weeks old? Or do you want the information that's only an hour or only a couple of days old? What do you want to go in that situation with? And it allowed us to all kind of refocus on what we were trying to do as a team, put the distractions and the critics to the side. Let's just focus on what's in our control. The other thing, and I'll admit to this now that I'm not a government employee, but the other thing I said to them is I used to tell them that we could write code faster than the IG can review documents.
I remember you telling me that story.
And my premise was I can refactor, rework code to make the software do whatever it needs to do to be right with what the system needs. And I can do that a lot faster than most of these organizations can produce, draft, review, and get a document approved. So as long as I've got the intelligence on what's coming, I can make it either something that I can say, no, we got the right answer already, and we just don't agree with your assessment, or I can adjust where we're at. So by the time I get the document recommendation, I basically turn it around as addressed and gone. And that's where I say sometimes it was a useful feedback loop. But
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
But mostly I was trying to keep focused on what was in our control, minimize as much as I could those external distractions. Go back to, Teddy Roosevelt's quote, it's not the critic who counts, not the one who points out how the strong man stumbled or how the doer of deeds might have done them better. Obviously, it's a very powerful quote for me. And I enjoyed getting things done as opposed to criticizing others.
Yeah, I that sense of purpose that you were talking about, because this just has real life impact what you were doing. I remember you also told me the story that people were concerned about security, like, or is the intelligence going to get too far? Are the other parts of the FBI going to learn too much about the stuff that's secret? And I remember you telling me, well, we trust them with guns. Couldn't we trust them with knowledge?
Well, that became a big policy enforcement, minimally viable product, because it was very easy several times to try to over-engineer the application of policy and policy enforcement. We actually had a code signal in the development room that at one point I did this and the developers picked up on it and started using it with each other when they started to feel like somebody was over-engineering and getting down the rabbit hole of trying to make perfection when we could get to minimally viable and move on. We started to hold our hands up and act like we had a trigger finger. And it was you have to use your brain before you use your keyboard and mouse. You have to use your brain before you use your trigger finger as well. Keep your finger off the trigger until you know what you're doing. Keep your finger off the keyboard until you know what you're doing. You probably ought to apply that to social media too. Keep your finger off the keyboard.
I completely agree. So as you move forward, so the Sentinel project goes live. It's an incredible success. But one of the things I get asked by leaders all the time, especially in large, old organizations, is how do you deal with bureaucracy. And I know that you were at, the FBI, then you went and was, digitizing the U.S. Postal Service, both of which are storied institutions and do a lot of things well. But getting that bureaucracy, you mentioned, hey, let's, code faster than they can write a paper. But what would your advice be to other leaders who are just struggling with this?
We had the best answer is executive sponsorship. The best answer is really to look at yourself as a leader and say, I am willing to build a team that I trust. And I recognize that my past bureaucracy of controls to prevent something from doing something illegal, something against a regulation, something that would put financials at risk or something else at risk. There's hard policies, there's laws, there's security risks on PII and payment card information and things like that, where you don't want to be cavalier with those controls, right? So there's what I'm about to say shouldn't be applied to anything. It's got to be applied precisely, not broadly, right? So there's a set of controls that are very, very critical with cybersecurity controls and vulnerability management and payment card industry and PII and HIPAA and, a whole litany of those things that are truly important. And then there's a whole library of regulations and processes that have grown up over time because they were a good idea at the time. And sometimes they had a good result and sometimes they didn't. And because of the situation we had and the progress we were making and the sponsorship we had all the way to the director level, I got to pass on a lot of that stuff. And maybe twice I had to look at somebody and go, okay, we can do it your way and follow your policy, or we can do it my way and get Sentinel delivered. Now, if you really want to fight me on this, we can go ask the director which one of those he would choose. I'm okay with either answer. I'll figure it out if he decides to go your way. I never had anybody take me up on enforcing their policy if they couldn't trace it to like a hard control requirement. In private sector, you're talking about GAP, general computing controls. PCI is obviously a big one in the private sector as well, right? Those things are important and meaningful and have to be done. Some of the other internal stuff, you've got to be willing to break the rules and own that risk and ask for forgiveness if warranted. Fortunately, I didn't have to ask for forgiveness on any of those policies that I had to bend. Some of them were my own. As a CTO, I had some architecture standards that I went to the teams that were impacted and they said, look, I know that you and I agreed to this architecture standard a few months ago or a year ago, but given everything that we've got in play right now, I'm breaking this rule and I'm giving myself an exception. It was a little uncomfortable, but that had to happen, right?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is like, you got to be able to change your mind. Is that part of agility? It's like, I thought that was important, but now it's not.
I thought that was important, and I still believe it's important, but I believe that this is more important.
Exactly.
And maybe it's just more important in this situation. Maybe it's more important and I changed the policy, the process, the standard going forward. And that's actually what we did after Sentinel is we went back and we refactored all of the policies on software development and lifecycle management in order to enable and empower teams to take these types of risks within those constraints of, well, I can't cross these lines, and you need to be able to demonstrate capabilities and delivery within these timeframes so that otherwise you're going to have to take out some of the other controls, right? You have to do EVM and partial progress, like percent complete types of things.
Yeah.
If you're not doing 0-100 assessment every 2 weeks. So yeah, some of those trade-offs were critical for our success.
So I know in your work now, you're advising a lot of people, in and out of government and all this other kind of stuff. When you talk to them and you sort of tell, from your experience at the FBI and the Postal Service, and really driving massive change into these government organizations. And I talk to a lot of government people that sort of, it can't be changed. It's just too hard. It's just too big. It's just too much. What do you tell those leaders as they're struggling with some of the same stuff you struggled with, 10 years ago?
You can make change. And in many cases, the change is needed. People have to understand, why are we trying to make a change? Are we trying to make a change just because it's a change? Are we trying to make a change because it's in the benefit of some third party? I'm going to throw a couple of strategies under the bus here. And so I don't mean to insult anybody, but cloud first never should have been a strategy. If you want to be agile in your deployment of resources, if you want resource pooling and resource utilization, that's a focus area that you can think of from a platform as a service concept. And the address doesn't matter, the brand name doesn't matter, but the attributes of cloud could be important. But when cloud first gets interpreted to go get a contract with a major cloud service provider, and you don't really know how to manage the contract or the customer required controls on those cloud services, you're in a whole heap of trouble real fast. So thinking about, what are you really trying to achieve? Is it flexibility, agility? Is it cost controls or knowable costs, consistent costs? Or what are you really trying to do? The other one that bothers me a lot is modernization for the sake of modernization. There's a lot of good old technology out there that works really well. Not everything needs to be modernized in order to provide a better citizenship experience. Not everything needs to be modernized in order to make it more agile. A lot of things would get those benefits if you modernize them, but be intentional about what the true objective is. And that's why I'm so excited about the new relationship I have with Virtualytics, because when they talk about AI, they talk about mission AI. And they talk about, and mission comes first for their government sector clients, particularly. They come not just with the concepts of how AI might be able to help broadly, but they come with specific solutions that are built on a robust modeling platform and a robust AI platform that'll inform a specific decision point that they know the government is struggling with. And they've thought about, when does the government need to make a decision? What information is available at the time to feed the model? What predictions would be useful in order to make a better decision at that point in time with the information you have available? And really be insightful on making better readiness decisions or better maintenance decisions, or working towards veteran mental health and some of those CTE type, traumatic brain injury types of challenges that we as a society are struggling with today. So I'm really excited to be working with them on big, hard problems, but defined problems, working on solutions and decisions to make an impact on the outcome.
That is so important. That is not so critical.
Not just hey, this is a beautiful dashboard. And you see the link analysis. Or
I asked my CFO for a dashboard, and he actually looked at me and goes, how is that going to change your decision making? Or do you just want something that you're curious about? And I actually said, you're right. That is actually not going to change a single decision that I make. But I think that the focus on outcomes is so reflective also of the importance of agility. I mean, I get calls, from companies all the time, like, we want to be more agile. And I'm like, but why do you want to be more agile? Because, an agile transformation, that's hard, and it costs money, and you're disrupting your organization. Just have a reason, and starting with that rather than, hey, how is your daily stand-up 16 minutes rather than 15 minutes? It's just having that why. And I think especially in the government space, because if you're talking about veterans' health, you're talking about these things are hugely important to people's lives. And they need to focus on that rather than, are we using the most modern technology? But how is that going to help? How is that going to help? And I feel like AI is getting there. It's like AI is everything. Like it can be solved with AI, and I think AI is amazing. I'm using it all the time, but it's not just like Agile. It's not magic. Not yet, anyway.
It's not magic, and you need to be intentional about how you're using it. If it's a modeling to the average, AI could end up being just as bad as bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is the enforcement of mediocrity, right? It prevents people from failing and it prevents people from being successful, right? Bureaucracy is essentially the enforcement of mediocrity. Is mediocre okay? And if mediocre is not okay, then you need to think about how much risk are you willing to take to be good or great or really impactful in a key mission area. Like, I don't know, the Postal Service, delivering medications or delivering checks for fixed income families or being able to restore service after a disaster, things that the Postal Service does really, really well. And it may seem small when you and I are talking about it in the abstract, but if you're a family that needs a check in their mailbox in order to put food on the table tonight, that matters. That's impactful. My favorite story right after we just delivered Sentinel was a team came back to us and they said, we had a fraud against a small business. They called us. We were able to use Sentinel to basically understand the nature of the activity quick enough to contact a foreign legat, get foreign collaboration to stop the acceptance of a bank transfer to a foreign bank, keeping the assets in the U.S. so that they could be, frankly, repatriated and gotten back to the victim. If you're a small business or you're a family or something, that's probably one of the most eventful things that's ever happened to you.
That has happened in hours. Like it may that could happen in days. They're going to get. They would have gotten that money offshore in hours.
Right. It may be a routine thing that the FBI does every day, but for the victims and for the other people involved, it's probably the most traumatic experience of their life. That's why it's important. That's why it's so important to have these institutions that have people focused on that mission space. And it's a heavy load that they carry for us. And I appreciate it every day.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm grateful to have had the chance to work with government institutions, because I completely agree with you that the purpose is important. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think it would be really valuable for people who aren't trying to make a difference in the world.
As you know, JJ, I'm really proud of the team I got the opportunity to lead at the FBI. I'm really proud of what we accomplished as a group and the environment I was able to create for them to be successful. Love to throw a shout out to a bunch of them. A couple of them spun off and built a company called Caseware, which has brought all of that expertise in managing law enforcement or corporate security functions to basically anybody who needs to manage information and manage workflows, particularly in a security or law enforcement environment. And the stuff that they can do is generations ahead of what we did the first time around, but definitely built on the learnings of that environment and that empowerment and the trust that we built within the team. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you continuing to help tell the story. And if there's any way I can help people who are working to understand the risk of putting themselves out there and doing something different versus the risk of staying in the status quo, certainly I'm happy to share my story and talk about that.
And how can people find you? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Best way to find me is probably on LinkedIn. So JEFC Johnson is my LinkedIn handle. 1F, middle initial C, last name Johnson. So type that into LinkedIn. You should be able to find me.
Yeah, and we'll put a link in the show notes so they can find you as well. Well, Jeff, as always, really great to talk to you.
Always an enjoyable conversation, JJ. Thank you.
The Agile CEO is brought to you by Scrum Inc. In today's fast-paced world, adaptability is key. Our expert consulting services tailor transformations that drive measurable success, creating resilient, high-performing organizations. Whether you're leading a team, managing an organization, or guiding enterprise-level change, we're here to support your journey. transform with confidence, and achieve the outcomes that matter. Learn more at scruminc.com.